The woman in the $7,000 dress was dying, and everyone was just watching. Not filming. Not calling for help. Just watching, like she was street theater, like her gasping breaths were part of some performance they'd paid to see. Samson pushed through the circle of designer handbags and Italian leather shoes, dropped to his knees in the dirt beside her, and made a choice that would teach him the cruelest lesson of his life. Sometimes saving someone is the easy part. It's surviving their gratitude that kills you. This is that story. And trust me, you've never heard anything like it. Before we begin, subscribe and hit that like button. Turn on all notifications if you love a good revenge story, because this tale has more twists than a pretzel factory. And drop a comment right now telling me, where are you watching from and what time is it? The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the crowded marketplace, casting sharp shadows across the dusty cobblestones. Samson wiped the sweat from his brow with a calloused hand, his worn work shirt already damp from the humid air. He had been up since dawn, hauling crates of produce from the delivery trucks to the various vendor stalls that lined the square. It was back-breaking work, the kind that left his muscles aching and his back sore by midday, but it was honest work, and Samson took pride in that. At 32 years old, Samson had known little else but labor. His father had been a construction worker, his grandfather a farmer, and the legacy of hard work ran deep in his veins. He lived in a small apartment on the edge of town, in a neighborhood where the paint peeled from buildings and children played in streets that rarely saw maintenance crews. But Samson didn't complain. He had food on his table, a roof over his head, and the respect of those who knew him as a man of his word. As he loaded another crate onto his shoulder, Samson noticed a commotion near the fountain at the center of the square. A crowd was beginning to gather, their voices rising in a mixture of concern and curiosity. He set down his burden and moved closer, his natural instinct to help overriding his work obligations. That's when he saw her. A young woman lay crumpled on the ground, her designer dress spread around her like a fallen flower. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the harsh sunlight, and her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. Samson recognized her immediately, Daniela Castellanos, daughter of one of the city's wealthiest families. He had seen her picture in newspapers, always attending charity galas or ribbon-cutting ceremonies, always immaculately dressed and surrounded by the city's elite. But now, she was just a person in distress. Samson pushed through the gathering crowd, dropping to his knees beside her. "Someone call an ambulance!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the murmur of onlookers. He gently tilted her head back to ensure her airway was clear, remembering the basic first aid he had learned years ago when he briefly worked at a construction site. "Don't touch her!" a shrill voice called out. Samson looked up to see a well-dressed woman clutching her pearls, her face twisted in disgust. "You'll make it worse. Someone like you shouldn't." "She needs help now," Samson interrupted firmly, turning his attention back to Daniela. Her eyelids fluttered, and she seemed to be struggling to maintain consciousness. He noticed her medical alert bracelet, diabetes. His sister had the same condition. This could be a hypoglycemic episode. "Does anyone have something sweet? Juice, candy, anything?" Samson called out to the crowd. A street vendor rushed forward with a bottle of orange juice, thrusting it into Samson's hands. Carefully, Samson helped raise Daniela's head, bringing the bottle to her lips. "Small sips," he said gently. "You're going to be okay." As Daniela slowly regained color in her cheeks, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Samson could hear the whispers, feel the judgment in their stares. Why is he touching her? Someone should pull him away. Probably just looking for a reward. This is inappropriate. Where is security? The word stung, but Samson kept his focus on Daniela. Her eyes opened fully now, confusion clouding her gaze as she looked up at him. For a moment, their eyes met, and Samson saw something he hadn't expected. Recognition, not of who he was, but of what he was doing. Gratitude. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens cutting through the marketplace chaos. Paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher and equipment, immediately taking over Daniela's care. Samson stepped back, fading into the crowd as the professionals worked. He watched as they checked her vital signs, administered glucose, and prepared her for transport to the hospital. "Who helped her first?" one of the paramedics asked, looking around at the crowd. Several people pointed at Samson, who stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. The paramedic approached him, extending a hand. "You potentially saved her life. Quick thinking with the juice. You know someone with diabetes?" Samson nodded. "My sister." "Well, you did good today," the paramedic said, clapping him on the shoulder before returning to help load Daniela into the ambulance. As the ambulance pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their shopping and errands as if nothing had happened. Samson walked back to his crates, his mind still processing what had just occurred. He didn't expect anything to come of it. He had simply done what any decent person would do. Or should do, he corrected himself, thinking of those who had stood by, watching, judging, but not helping. 3 days passed before Samson heard anything more about the incident. He was finishing his shift at the warehouse when his supervisor called him into the office. "There's someone here to see you," the older man said, his expression unreadable. Samson's heart sank. Had he done something wrong? Was there going to be trouble because of what happened at the marketplace? But when he entered the small office, he found Daniela Castellanos herself, looking remarkably recovered and dressed in casual but clearly expensive clothes. Standing beside her was an older man in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression stern. "This is him?" the man asked, his eyes scanning Samson from head to toe with barely concealed disdain. "Yes, father," Daniela said quietly. "This is the man who helped me." Victor Castellanos, Daniela's father, had built an empire in real estate and investments. He was known throughout the city as a shrewd businessman, someone who valued status, appearances, and the strict hierarchies that divided their society. The way he looked at Samson made it clear that he saw nothing but a common laborer, someone far beneath his daughter's social sphere. "I suppose we owe you a debt of gratitude," Victor said, his tone making it clear that the words tasted bitter in his mouth. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This should more than compensate you for your assistance." Samson looked at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "I don't want money, sir. I just did what anyone should have done." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his composed expression. "Everyone wants something. Name your price, and let's be done with this." "Father," Daniela began, but Victor raised a hand to silence her. Samson felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Your daughter needed help. I helped her. That's all there is to it. I don't need payment for being a decent human being." The room fell silent. Victor stared at Samson as if he were a puzzle that didn't fit into any of his carefully constructed categories. People in Victor's world always wanted something: power, money, connections. The concept of someone acting purely out of compassion seemed to genuinely confuse him. "Father, I'd like to thank him properly," Daniela said, her voice stronger now. "Perhaps we could invite him to—" "Absolutely not," Victor cut her off sharply. "We've thanked him. That's sufficient." He turned back to Samson. "I trust this matter is concluded." Before Samson could respond, Daniela stepped forward, extending her hand. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes meeting his. "Truly. You saved my life, and I won't forget that." Samson shook her hand, noting the softness of her skin compared to his rough, work-worn palm. "I'm just glad you're okay, miss." As they left, Samson couldn't help but notice the tension between father and daughter, the way Victor's hand gripped Daniela's elbow just a bit too firmly as he guided her out. There was a story there, Samson thought, a complexity beneath the surface that he couldn't fully see. In the weeks that followed, Samson tried to put the incident behind him. He returned to his routine: work, home, occasional visits with friends at the local cafe, Sunday dinners with his mother and sister. But the encounter had left an impression on him that he couldn't quite shake. He began to notice things he had always known but never quite articulated. The way people in his neighborhood looked out for each other, sharing food when times were tough, helping repair a neighbor's roof, watching each other's children. There was a richness in community that had nothing to do with money. And yet, he also saw the barriers, the invisible walls that divided the city into territories of wealth and poverty, privilege and struggle. Samson thought about the people in the marketplace who had stood by while Daniela collapsed. Many of them had been well-dressed, presumably educated, from the better parts of town. And yet they had hesitated, held back by concerns about propriety, about what it would look like to help, about potential complications. Meanwhile, it had been a street vendor, someone who probably had as little as Samson himself, who had immediately offered the juice without hesitation. What did that say about their society? About the values they claimed to uphold versus the ones they actually lived by? These thoughts occupied Samson's mind as he went about his work. He found himself questioning things he had previously accepted as simply the way things were. Why should someone's worth be measured by their bank account? Why should helping another human being be seen as unusual or suspicious? Why should compassion be the exception rather than the rule? One evening, as Samson sat in his small apartment reading the newspaper, he came across an article about the Castellanos family. They were hosting a charity gala to raise money for the city's public hospital. The irony wasn't lost on Samson. The same people who had looked at him with suspicion and disgust when he helped Daniela were now publicly celebrating their own generosity. But even as cynicism threatened to take root, Samson reminded himself that complexity existed in all things. Perhaps Daniela genuinely wanted to help. Perhaps there were others in that wealthy circle who truly cared about making a difference. It was easy to paint with broad brushes, to divide the world into simple categories of good and bad, worthy and unworthy. The truth, Samson knew, was always more nuanced. A month after the incident, Samson received an unexpected visitor at his workplace. A young woman in professional attire approached him during his lunch break, introducing herself as Maria Santos, a journalist for the city newspaper. "I've been researching a story about social divisions in our city," she explained, pulling out a notebook. "Your name came up in connection with the incident involving Daniela Castellanos. I'd like to interview you, if you're willing." Samson hesitated. He had no desire for attention or publicity. But something in Maria's earnest expression, the genuine interest in her eyes, made him reconsider. Over the next hour, Samson shared his perspective, not just on that day in the marketplace, but on the broader issues it had illuminated for him. He spoke about the invisible barriers that divided their society, about the assumptions people made based on appearances, about the difference between charity and true compassion. Charity, Samson said thoughtfully, often comes from a position of superiority. It's the wealthy giving to the poor, the powerful helping the powerless. But compassion, real compassion, recognizes our shared humanity. It sees no distinction between the person helping and the person being helped. We're all vulnerable. We all need each other. Maria scribbled notes furiously, occasionally asking follow-up questions. When the interview concluded, she thanked Samson warmly. "I think your perspective is exactly what this city needs to hear." The article ran 2 weeks later, and Samson was surprised by the response it generated. Letters to the editor poured in, some praising his actions and echoing his sentiments, others criticizing him for, as one writer put it, not knowing his place. The article sparked debates on radio shows and in coffee shops throughout the city. For Samson, the attention was uncomfortable, but he recognized that the conversation itself was valuable. People were questioning their assumptions, examining their own biases, considering how they might act differently in similar situations. What Samson didn't know was that Daniela had read the article too, and it had struck a chord deep within her. She had been raised in a world of privilege, taught that her family's wealth set them apart, made them better, more deserving. But her near-death experience and Samson's selfless response had cracked that carefully constructed worldview. Daniela began to question everything: her father's business practices, the way her family treated those they considered beneath them, the purpose of her own life. She started volunteering at the public hospital, not for photo opportunities, but actually working, talking to patients, learning their stories. This did not sit well with Victor Castellanos. He saw his daughter's transformation as a rebellion, a rejection of everything he had built and stood for. Arguments became frequent in the Castellanos household, with Victor insisting that Daniela was throwing away her future and Daniela countering that she was finally finding her purpose. The conflict came to a head at a family dinner when Victor demanded that Daniela stop her foolish charity work and focus on the upcoming merger with another wealthy family's business empire, a merger that would be sealed by Daniela's arranged marriage to the family's eldest son. "I won't be a pawn in your business dealings," Daniela said firmly, standing her ground despite her father's reddening face. "You ungrateful!" Victor's hand slammed on the table, making the fine china rattle. "Everything I've done for this family, for you. And you repay me by cavorting with commoners and throwing away the opportunities I've worked to secure. The opportunity to marry someone I don't love? To spend my life maintaining appearances and measuring my worth by the balance in my bank account." Daniela's voice was steady but passionate. "That laborer you looked down on showed me more genuine humanity in 5 minutes than I've seen in years of charity galas and society events." The bitterness in Victor's heart had been building for years, bitterness toward a world that he believed had forced him to claw his way to the top, bitterness toward those he saw as weak or foolish enough to value anything over wealth and power. And now that bitterness was directed at his own daughter, the one person he believed should understand and appreciate his sacrifices. Their relationship deteriorated rapidly. Victor cut off Daniela's access to the family fortune, convinced that hardship would bring her back to her senses. Instead, Daniela found an apartment in a modest neighborhood, took a job as an administrator at the public hospital, and began building a life based on her own values rather than her father's expectations. The destruction that bitterness and unresolved conflict can cause doesn't always happen in dramatic explosions. Sometimes it's a slow erosion, a gradual breaking of bonds that once seemed unbreakable. Victor and Daniela's estrangement became complete, with neither willing to bridge the gap that had grown between them. For Samson, life continued its steady rhythm. He remained unaware of the specific drama playing out in the Castellanos family, though he occasionally wondered what had become of the young woman he'd helped that day in the marketplace. He continued his work, continued his quiet acts of kindness in his community, continued to live by the principles that had guided him long before that fateful encounter. The story of Samson and Daniela spread beyond the article, becoming a kind of urban legend in the city, a reminder that heroism often comes from unexpected places, that true character is revealed not in planned moments but in spontaneous responses to crisis, and that the divisions we create between ourselves are often far more fragile than we realize. In the end, the most profound lesson was this: compassion requires no credentials, kindness recognizes no social boundaries, and the courage to do the right thing matters far more than the status of the person taking action. Samson had demonstrated that on an ordinary day in an ordinary marketplace, and in doing so, had shown that perhaps the most revolutionary act in a divided society is simply treating every human being with dignity and care, regardless of who they are or where they come from.